The clone stamp tool is an excellent way to remove unwanted elements in Photoshop, but it's very different from the healing brush in that it makes an exact duplicate of what you sample. I typically use this all the time because I feel that it gives me a little bit more control, and I also find that it doesn't have the soft edges that sometimes I see with the different healing brush tools. So let's go ahead and zoom in. I'll use Command 1 in order to zoom into 100%, and then maybe Command plus again to zoom in. I'll select the clone stamp tool by just tapping on the S key, and then I'll use the right bracket to get a larger brush. Now, by default, the aligned option is toggled off, which means that every time you click in order to use the stamp tool, it will actually go back to the same original source point. Let me show you what I mean. If I hold down the Option key and click right here on the lamp, and then I click and go ahead and drag the cursor to clone that area, we can see the crosshairs over the lamp in the source area. When I release the mouse and I reposition the cursor and I click again, you can see that it's going back to that same initial point. If instead you prefer to keep the distance the same between the source point and the point that you're fixing, then you could toggle on the align option. So now, although I first option click on the lamp, when I click and drag over here to stamp it, and then I release my cursor and I reposition my cursor, we can see that those crosshairs are actually going to move in alignment. So it's going to keep the relative distance between the sample point and where I'm cloning. All right, I'm going to use Command Z multiple times just to go back in time. I'll hold down the space bar and we'll scoot down to the foreground area where I want to remove this hose. I'll get a much smaller brush by using the left bracket key. And then I want to make sure that I set my sample point as far away as I can, but still have it be matching in color and tone. And the reason I say to set it further away is because if I set it really close to the hose, and then I try to stamp over the hose, you're probably going to see patterns that are created because the sample point and the clone point are so close together. In fact, let's go ahead and demonstrate that. If I hold down the Option key, I get a little bit bigger brush here, and I set it to sample right below that hose, and then I start painting, we're probably going to see the repeating patterns here. And if I switch to the Move tool so that I've got the pointer tool, we can see, for example, that these two rocks match, and I'm kind of looking at this angular pattern here. So I'm going to undo that using Command Z, return to the Stamp tool by tapping the S key, getting a little bit smaller of a brush, and I'll hold down the Option key and I'll sample from way over here. Then I'll release the Option key and then paint in order to remove that hose. Then I'm going to release the mouse and pick up different points by just clicking down the Option key, maybe moving a little bit further. I might pick up a point from the right side this time. Again, I'm just trying to avoid any repeating patterns in the image. Now we can see that I picked up a dark area and then a light area. So I might need to stick a little bit closer here on the right side because the area here is darker than here as we start getting underneath the shadow here of the bush. So I'll get a little bit smaller of a brush and then just get a little bit closer, maybe paint a little bit, and then continuously change the source area by option clicking in different areas so that I don't get the repeating pattern, but so that it's still close enough so that I get the same values. And we can do the same thing in the background. I'll just zoom in one more time, get a little bit smaller of a brush using that bracket key, and then we can remove the hose from this area. And here I might sample again just a little bit further away, or I might need to sample in the bushes here in order to carry the bushes through to that area. All All right, I'll just go ahead and clone that bush up a little bit. In fact, let's just fill in that whole area with a little bit of bush, making sure that we're not getting those repeating patterns. And what do we have over here? All right, a little bit more. So again, I'll option click and then just remove these areas here, removing that distracting hose. So if I were just going to post this image to social media at a really low res, then I might not need to come in here and use the clone stamp tool, right? I might be able to just use the healing brush in order to remove the hose, or, maybe it's not that important to you and it's going to be so small on social media that you might not need to do this at all. But if I was going to print this large, I would want to make sure that I definitely go in and just remove any of these distracting elements. All right, let's zoom out using Command 0. And you'll notice that on the Layers panel, I actually did all of that cloning and retouching on the background layer. But if I had wanted to, I could have created a new layer and then set the sample to sample from either all layers or the current layer and below. But I was pretty confident that I would be able to remove that on a single layer. If I go under the Window menu and I show my History panel, we can quickly scroll up to the top if I wanted to see a before and after. By clicking on the snapshot, there's before, and then by scrolling down, here's the current state or the after. So as we can see, Photoshop's Clone Stamp tool is very powerful, especially when you need exact control over the area that you're removing.